I'm Katy Davies, and welcome to this Enfield Voices webinar. This is one of our new series of community interviews hosted by myself and Julia Daniel. We're very pleased to have you with us, whether you're watching us through Enfield Voices or one of the many other Enfield community websites that we're broadcasting from this evening. I'm going to hand over now to Julia to introduce you to our guest for this evening.
Hi, good evening. Thank you all for joining us. Do feel free to get involved by typing in some questions on the Enfield Voices thread, and we will try and pick some of them up as we go along, if we can. So tonight, the shoe is on the other foot. Francis Sealey, who normally does interviews on behalf of GlobalNet21 and Enfield Voices, has agreed to be subjected to the questioning of myself and Katy. Thank you for that, Francis. So we'd like to start off by asking you a little bit about your life before Enfield Voices, I guess. Have you always been interested in politics?
Oh, you actually think I had a life before Enfield Voices? Wow. Yeah, I've always been interested in politics. I mean, from a very early age. I think when I was 8, I was writing a little paper on how to reunite Germany. Must have been a terrible bore as a kid. But I've always been interested in politics from 15 when I was very, very active. So politics has been my passion, but not just politics, education, engagement, getting people to develop new ideas, and really to get people to think beyond just the power framework of political parties, but how those ideas get put into practice by involving a wide range of people.
You talked about sort of opening up politics, I guess, to more people. Do you think that the political structure that we've got in the UK sort of lends itself to wider participation in democracy, or do you think that that's something that you would like to change?
Well, yes and no. Does it lend itself is the answer. No, because it's, I mean, the tradition of Britain is to be a two-party state over the years. It's basically been that, and it has a first-past-the-post system that reinforces that, but culturally it's been like that as well. And that's prevented, I think, the sort of changes that I'd like to see, because parties are about power and they tend to tailor their policies in order to get power. But the yes side of that is that, you know, politics isn't just about political parties. Only 2% of the people belong to political parties. Lots of the politics happens in the community where people join pressure groups or charities or do things to make a difference. They may do something to try, like for example, build a food co-op, and you may not think that's political, but it is, because it's building self-sufficiency. So politics is much wider than the political parties. So I have hope that those structures can develop and change society. The political party issue, though, that's a much tougher one.
Completely changing the subject, I've got a question from one of our viewers. Nothing to do with, well, it might be to do with politics, I don't know, because politics, obviously, as you've said, can be anything. What was your favourite subject at school?
Oh boy, you'll never believe it. Chemistry.
I was all hoping you were going to say politics.
Yes.
No, it was chemistry and it was history, those two things. In fact, when I did my A-levels, I wanted to do chemistry, modern history, and economics. And of course, I was in an old-fashioned grammar school. You could only do arts or science, and you wouldn't do social science because they thought that was a bit too trendy. So I never did anything I really wanted. But chemistry was a subject I used to love at school.
So you moved to Palmer's Green quite some time ago now. I would imagine it was probably quite different then when you moved into how it is now. What made you move to London, and sort of what were your first impressions of it when you got here?
Well, I actually lived in London when I was a student because I did my degree here. And then after that, I went and did my master's in Canada, taught for a year in Canada, and then taught for a year in Grimsby. And what made me move back to London was I got a job with the BBC. And I became a producer, and I worked for the Open University and made lots of programs in politics, in the politics area. That was my area of program making. And of course, we were based at Alexandra Palace, so Palmer's Green was quite close. And that's why I moved to Palmer's Green.
So you made all those programs for serious people with, you know, wearing donkey jackets and...
Well, I even presented some. I didn't wear a donkey jacket, but I did have flared trousers, and I did have I had a flowered shirt.
Oh, fantastic.
Is there video evidence of this, Francis?
Was that you asking that, Katie?
Yes.
I had a feeling it might be. There probably is. It's in the archives of the Open University somewhere in black and white. You can find the evidence. I don't have it because I'm trying to hide it. No, actually, I'm not. I'm quite proud of that. But I'm sure it's there. Yeah.
We'll have to dig that out, I think. Okay, so that's really interesting. So you worked at how long were you at the BBC for?
Well, I joined in '69 and I was there until '93, and I was a producer and executive producer. I worked in the community programs unit and also on a project that linked broadcasting with the unemployed. And then in 1993, I became a freelance and made programs on my own, working on my own as an individual producer. And I did that for about 11 years. And then I got to the stage where I decided I didn't need to earn money in the way I had before. And that's when I began to think about starting GlobalNet and later on Enfield Voices.
So in all that time that you were sort of producing these politics programs, who was asking you to name drop now? Who is the most interesting guest that you had?
I can never answer a question like that, who was the most interesting. I had a lot of interesting people. You know, lots of the people I worked with, for example, were, you know, people who worked in communities who were doing great work. I filmed when I was a freelance in Ghana, and I was out miles from anywhere, and I was the only white man from 100 miles around filming in tribal communities. Those were interesting people. But, you know, I've also met and interviewed lots of interesting people. Justice Douglas in the United States of America was one of the, you know, greatest justices of the Supreme Court, and we interviewed him at 8 o'clock in the morning on the banks of the Chesapeake and Ohio Canal. Tony Benn was interesting. John Biffin from the Conservative Party, one of the nicest men you could meet, and who actually went to the same grammar school as me, but he was 13 years older than me. You know, Dennis Skinner, who was a strange guy. But lots of politicians, lots of ordinary people, people doing really, really good things. I've met a huge number of people, and I've been very lucky because of that.
Is it, so one last question for me, and then I'm going to hand over to Katy, who's been very, very patient. Is it true that you should never meet your heroes?
My hero?
Yes. So have you ever met any of your heroes, and you know, were you terribly disappointed, or were they exactly as you thought they would be?
Well, I don't know if I've had heroes, really. I mean, when I was a kid, Captain Marvel was my hero. And I certainly didn't meet him. Superman was my hero too, when I used to pay 6p and go into the Odeon cinema on the children's matinee in the morning. And he was a rather fat man who used to jump out the window, and we had to imagine that he was flying. And I never met him, but in terms of real life heroes, I suppose there are people who have been role models that I wouldn't have met, like Mahatma Gandhi, who I have great respect for in his non-violent approach, and Martin Luther King as well. People like that have been, you know, to me, great role models. And of course, I never met any of those.
Yeah, so I'm just thinking, so Tony Benn, I would have, I'm not sure that I would have been able to actually bring myself to speak to him, to be honest, but that kind of thing, because obviously you met a lot of the big political figures of the day, I'm assuming.
Yeah, I mean, Tony Benn, I interviewed him in his house in Holland Park, and the sound man said to me, listen, can you ask Tony Benn if we can change the room because his floorboards creak? And Tony said, no, that's just actuality. So we went on with the interview and creaking floorboards.
Fantastic. That's really interesting. I didn't know a lot of that about you, Francis, and I'm sure our viewers would also have been very interested to hear about your former life. But if we can just move on now to the creation of GlobalNet21 and Enfield Voices, how did the vision for this come about?
Well, as I said, I've always been interested in politics and education, engagement, and so on. And when I had come to the end of, you know, needed to get paid work, I thought, you know, what am I going to do for the rest of my life? And I wanted to do the things that I had a passion for. On top of that, I also believe that, you know, we were going through a real paradigm change in the 21st century. This century was going to be like no other. And it meant that all the blueprints that we had developed in the 20th and 19th centuries were going to be found wanting. They're going to be inadequate. And so one of the most important things to do, one of the biggest actions we could do, was to actually develop ideas and have a dialogue around them, and to try and find how this new century is going to emerge. It was like the beginning of the 19th century when industrialization took place. No one knew exactly where it was going to go. People were all over the place with their ideas before they firmed them up into philosophies or ideologies. And today we're in that position. I don't think we will firm them up into new ideologies because we're in a network world. But I wanted people to get together and discuss those big ideas. So I started GlobalNet21. We started on the meetup site. I got someone who got involved with me very strongly. We then developed that site. So we got lots and lots of members joining. We started on Facebook and LinkedIn and Twitter and so on. And we use social networks to try and get people together to exchange those ideas. We developed meetings in the House of Commons so that we could gauge MPs and involve them in that. And we then moved on because we realized, because we were using Facebook and so on, that we're getting a global audience. We decided to use webinars because that opened us up to the world. And so that enabled us to engage people from across the globe, as well as in London, on developing these big ideas, and then providing the space for them to network together in order to create the action that's appropriate for them. And lots of people have done that. They've got together, they joined groups, they started social enterprises. Because of one of our meetings, money was raised to buy a tractor in Africa. Someone started a social enterprise from it. Someone started a transitional town movement from it. People have got together and actually created new ways of doing things, but also developed new ideas. And we had this festival in Broomfield Park, as you know, on Sunday. And as I was leaving at the end of it, someone came up to me. He said, you know, that was really good. And by the way, I come to some of your GlobalNet events, and there's not one that I've been to where I've not gone away inspired with new ideas, learning something new and thinking differently. And that, to me, summed it up to me about what it was about.
Oh, that's great. And I think when people come back and say that kind of thing, that is what makes it really meaningful. So how many members would you say you'd estimate worldwide, both GlobalNet21? What's the reach now, would you say? And what would you say your target is?
I mean, we have paid members and we have very few, so we work on a shoestring budget. We try and do more for less than that. We try and do everything for nothing. We've got about 30,000 people in our networks of one different kind or the other. And we have an eavesdropping audience beyond that as well, because streaming on Facebook allows us to do that. So we probably can reach ultimately 30, 40, 50,000 people. Do I want more? I'd love more, yes, but I don't want to take over the world. I used to when I was younger. That's what I wanted to do. I wanted to take over the world. I wanted the organizations I was developing to be the prime organizations, you know. But I've got to the stage in life where I realized that that never happens to anyone. And the most important thing is to do what you can do that's good and important, and then collaborate with others that are doing the same thing. So you create a network of ideas and action. And if you can bring people together in that way, you've achieved something.
That's really great. And I think there's obviously been lots of positives that have come out of it. But another question would be, what have been some of the challenges of hosting both of those groups?
Well, the challenge is, you know, we do about 75 events a year, so the challenge is getting those together. You know, I said I've done 75 events a year. On Sunday, I did 10 in one day. You know, that's a real challenge. So you have to be organized. And luckily, I'm a person who, whenever I go anywhere, I'm always early. So when I organize things, I'm always ahead of myself. And I have a deadline, which is before what a real deadline is. So I try to meet that challenge by organizing myself in that way. But of course, the challenges are that, you know, people often, although they're very positive, can come up and be negative as well. They can say, oh, you're just talking, you're not acting. Or they can say, you know, you're involving everyone, and that dilutes things down. And you know, you should be concentrating on the right path and the right path only. And the challenge is to involve those, and the challenge is, as well, is to engage those. And of course, the other challenge when you use social networks, as you know only too well, Katy, is the abuse that you can get online. You know, I've had that too. Everyone's had that. You need to have a thick skin. You need to, you know, not be insensitive really, but to realize it doesn't matter, and to realize that most of the people often who can abuse online aren't really abusive. It's just that, you know, they talk almost on social networks as if they were in their own home, because it's sort of quite private when you're in your home typing on the computer. So you've got to get used to those challenges, and you've got to sort of toughen yourself up, not to be despondent. And you have got to, as well, and the other challenge is sometimes you fail on things, and never be despondent by the failure, because out of every failure comes a success, because you think of doing things differently. Always look upon what you're doing as a development of what you're going to do next.
You know, that's a great message, and one we should all try and remember. I think we all know really that all of our colleagues and friends on Enfield Voices are all very nice people really, but I think there's something about social media sometimes that gets things blown out of proportion, or like you say, it's easy to forget that we're actually talking to other human beings. There's been a lot of talk recently.
Yeah, I was going to say that, I mean, you know, even people on social media have insulted me like hell. None of them I dislike, and I think it's important to try and not dislike people, to try and, you know, think of them as a human being, and they may be doing things because they've had a bad day or they've had a bad life recently or whatever, but to treat them as human beings, and then I think you get through it.
No, that's absolutely, and everybody's opinion is valid, and we can only really learn from listening to people who sometimes don't disagree with us as well, I would say. And there's been quite a lot of discussion recently, I would say, about the issues of sort of freedom of speech, what constitutes personal comments, what constitutes hate speech. What do you think kind of draws the line between those things?
I don't know. I'm sort of finding that out every day. It's almost by trial and error in a way. I mean, I believe in free speech, and I wish we could have total free speech, but you know, John Stuart Mill said freedom is about doing anything you want as long as it doesn't harm anyone else. And I mean, that's my sort of philosophy. The problem is some people are so sensitive that everything harms them, and some people are less sensitive and very little harms them. So it's that bit in between that you've got to sort out. And you've got to draw the line on overt open racism and misogyny. You've got to draw the line against any abuse of individuals, but you've got to try and do that as much as you can by talking to those people rather than blocking them. That's not to say we haven't blocked people. We have blocked people. That's not to say in GlobalNet we've not had to get rid of people. We have, but you know, your first line of action is to talk to them, to try and engage them, to get them to see that freedom of speech is permissible if they use their freedom responsibly.
Yeah, and with freedom of speech is that always going to risk offence. There's always probably going to be somebody who's offended at the end of the day. You can't ever please everybody.
No, you can't, and so you've got to, you know, you've got to be fairly wide on it, because some people would, you know, if I were to say to you two, for example, listen, I think you two guys are doing a great interview, most people would think that was fine, but there are one or two people would say, oh, that's a terrible sexist statement to call you two guys, you know, and so how people perceive things is part of the problem. Some people say, yeah, but language is important, but for other people, a different language is important. So you've got to exercise tolerance, really.
I'm wondering, so obviously, how do you pick which topics you're going to post on? Do you have a certain?
Often by accident, often through serendipity, often by, you know, seeing what's in the news and what's topical and jumping on that. Often when I do in meetings in the House of Commons, seeing an MP who's done something who I think would want an audience to talk and engage with. often by people contacting me and saying, why don't we do this, that, and the other? And you've got to be careful, because I've had some people who've just wanted to contact me because they want an audience, and they'd be terrible in front of an audience. And so you've got to make a judgment, really. And often by collaboration, by working with other groups. So in GlobalNet, for example, we do meetings with Conway Hall Ethical Society, with London Futurists, the Greater London Debate Club, and several other groups as well. We discuss with them what we should do together, and then we organise it. So it's not one thing. It's a lot of things, but quite a few I decide myself, simply because I want to fill the gap. I don't want to be there to be any space in the schedule. So I collaborate as much as I can, and if there's a space, I fill it.
Yeah. So obviously we talked a little bit about sort of the politics. I'm just interested in so the global versus the local. That old saying, sort of think global and act local. How do you decide what is sort of appropriate for each? Because I suppose you could say that any topic could be made relevant to either of the groups. How do you sort of separate, or is there a can you separate them?
Well, you can't totally separate them, but you can for organisational purposes. So in GlobalNet, on our Facebook site and some of the meetings we hold, we do deal with global issues. But where those global issues have a local impact, then it's quite permissible to try and take those global issues up locally. So climate change, for example, which is a huge global issue, will have an impact on every locality in the world. And so you want to look at how it will impact on our locality, and what is the council doing to help mitigate the problems that will result from climate change, but how communities are also developing self-resilience. So that global issue relates to very much to local issues. The same could be said on pollution. The same could be said on trade. So, there's a whole debate between whether you have free trade on a global basis through multinational corporations, or whether at the local level you develop economic self-sufficiency through food co-ops and social enterprises and a lot more. So that debate comes together, and how they interrelate to each other is also important. So there are very few things that are not interrelated in terms of global and local.
And where do you see the so could you explain? I mean, I know the story, but most people on Enfield Voices won't know the story of how you came to be running it, I guess, because you didn't set it up, did you, originally? Yeah.
Well, I did, really. What I did was that I was doing GlobalNet, and I thought it would be great to do what we do in GlobalNet locally in Enfield. And there was a site on Facebook, which I think Chris Bond was running with a few councillors, and she gave up running it. There's only about 100 people on it. And Facebook said, is there anyone out there who wants to take it over? And I must have seen it exactly the right time, because I took it over straight away, and then called it Enfield Voices and started recruiting like anything to get new people on it. So yeah, I started it mainly by pinching someone else's site because he didn't want it any longer, because it gave me a basis, and that site had quite a lot of councillors on it, which was quite a good base to start with.
And where do you see it develop? How do you see it developing? Where do you see it?
I hope it will develop by doing what GlobalNet does, and is talking about the sort of big ideas and the impact, how it impacts locally. But one of the things that really pleased me was the festival we had on Sunday, where we had a speaker's corner. We had 10 events in one day, where people were speaking on mental health and high street regeneration and better street, meet your MP, community safety with your London Assembly member, meet councillors with 3 councillors. It went really smoothly. Everyone was very good. They all came on time. They all performed well. We had good audiences. But people have started to say, why don't we do this now and not, in between now and the next festival? Let's wait for the next festival. Let's see if we can have a speaker's voice in real time, not just online, but meetings around the sort of things we did on Sunday throughout the year. So the two people who were involved with the festival who I worked with to develop Speaker's Voice, Soph and Maria, who were fantastic. I'm meeting them Saturday morning, and that's one of the things we're going to discuss, how we can link in Enfield Voices. We're doing, you know, offline real meetings throughout the year, which becomes a continuation of the Speaker's Voice idea. And I think if we can develop that and we can combine it with the online things we're doing, that will be great. Then if we can develop the online things we're doing so we have more citizen journalism, and we're getting quite a lot of that. Hannah's interviews, like with the mayor and so on, been fantastic. Some of the citizen journalism that we can do, I think would be really, really great. And if we can continue to develop that and do interviews like this of people that are doing good in our community, and also do some webinars which forms a knowledge base behind what we're doing, we will have created real democratic energy and engagement and a huge knowledge base behind it. And I think if we can do that, that would be a fantastic achievement.
That all sounds really exciting, and I think people will look forward to hearing more about those events going forward. Here's an interesting question. So you mentioned that you thought perhaps the political party structure doesn't work as it is. What do you think about maybe having an Enfield Voices party, a kind of cross-party series of independents who might stand at local elections?
Well, they did that in Frome, didn't they? They had people who didn't like the party system there. It was dominated there by the Lib Dems and the Tories. And so people met in a pub and decided that they would put candidates up against all the candidates that were there. And they called themselves flat pack people, flat pack democracy. And they've written a book about it, and we've done a webinar on it. But I wouldn't want to do that. I wouldn't want an Enfield Voices party. I think we should work and bring and work through the existing parties, change it, make them open, make them more transparent. Say to them, for goodness sake, stop your being silly billies all the time. And look, on social care, you can get together. There are areas in the middle that don't depend on funding where you can improve social care just by working together, and you'd agree on them. And if we can get people to do that, we could achieve more than standing for a council election and getting involved in the theatre of the blame game. I don't want that. I'd rather have a much more positive approach where we know that most people are of good intentions and would work together if the right atmosphere was set. And I hope we can help to create that right atmosphere.
Yeah, I think you've totally hit the nail on the head, actually. I think people often forget that actually most of us probably have the same values when it comes down to it, whether it's, you know, prioritising health, education. Everyone wants the best. It's just that a lot of us perhaps disagree on the best way of going about that and what the actual solution is. But I suspect if we all got in a room together and put down our objectives and really thought about it, there might well be some more compromises, I think. Yeah, no,
I think that's absolutely right. And Edward Smith, one of your own councillors, said to me by email after Sunday's festival, he said, look, that's fantastic. We should do this more often. We councillors just don't get together like this. We're in the council chamber, we may have a drink afterwards, but we don't actually talk in a non-confrontational dialogue way, and we should do more of this. And I think if we could do that, and stop people shouting at each other, but just allow them to talk, I think we could get very far.
Yeah, well, I think actually a local council and perhaps Parliament as well, to a great extent, it's quite a false atmosphere. It doesn't always feel like a group of people like you might in an office when you have lots of people in a meeting discussing the best way of doing things with lots of different personality types. That seems to be a natural kind of progression when you're working in an office. But in politics, it seems to be it's all done across a chamber. It's all very formal. It doesn't sort of collaborate in quite the same way.
No, it doesn't. It doesn't entirely. But of course, there are things like select committees where they do collaborate together very well, but they don't have power. They have the power of scrutiny, but they don't have the power of legislation. And we might be able to move towards a situation where they have some power of legislation as well. But the parties wouldn't like that, because parties are about power and about elites obtaining power and using party whips to do that. And that's the real problem.
So we've talked a bit about the future of Enfield Voices. Do you think there might be sort of an expansion, almost a franchise of other sort of London boroughs, Barnet Voices, Ealing Voices, and we might all get together, just a sort of expansion of GlobalNet21?
Well, yeah, I mean, originally we thought about that, and we have got a couple. We've got Cambridge Voices and one or two others, but they're not very successful because, you know, you need people you need a real team together who will get, you know, lots of people on it. And we did it too early when we were just starting. I thought, we're starting, why don't we get a couple more? And that was silly. We should have just, you know, concentrated on this and got it successful and then moved it out. And I think this is becoming successful. And I think we could actually do what you said, franchise it out and get other people involved in doing similar things and linking in with other networks within their localities as well.
Okay, so before we just move on to a few more questions from the Facebook page, if anybody's asked, I wonder, Julia, do you have anything else you want to add on the sort of future of Enfield Voices and GlobalNet21?
I wondered actually, when you were sort of talking about moving outside of Enfield with it, do you think, when you've lived in a lot of places, you've spoken to people from a lot of areas, is Enfield quite a sort of political place? I was looking for, very long story, but I was looking for similar groups to advertise an event that's happening out in the Cotswolds, and I couldn't find. Nowhere seemed to have that sort of in a particular town. They didn't see. They had one group, whereas Enfield seems to have you know, lots, tens if not hundreds. But I just wanted
yeah. I mean, I think you're right. I mean, I think Enfield is very rich in its diversity of politics, community groups, and so on. But then other places are. I mean, I was brought up in a small West Country town of about 29,000. And it had lots of activities going on, political groups, anti-apartheid, boycott, South African goods in those days. With CND, we belonged to, I belonged to all of them, I think, at that time. They had it. But if you go to a small village, I mean, small village politics probably is a bit dire. And I would find that very difficult to be in that area. But, you know, having said that, we've got to understand it and work in the way that they will work, because there are different people in villages. They just don't get the opportunity to express their views. But I think if you had social networking, online social networking in that area, you would bring more views out than you actually see in the constrained, you know, sort of incestual atmosphere of a village.
So, Francis, if you were to be Prime Minister for a year, what would you set out to achieve? What would be your objective?
Well, it would be very difficult to achieve the objectives I would want in a year, but what I would obviously aim to do if I was in that position is to make a real attack on poverty, which means looking at housing and social care as well. I would try and make a real contribution to make sure that we're moving towards a sustainable economy, and a sustainable food and energy policy. And finally, I would want Britain to take the lead in being a peace influence in the world, and not one that thinks it has to be a policeman every time something goes wrong, and work through a United Nations that it would try to reform. Those are the things I would do.
That's really interesting. And sort of following on from that, you talked earlier about you'd been to quite a number of different countries and in fact have lived abroad for a time as well. Are there any particular countries you kind of sort of want to model the UK model a little bit more than we do at the moment?
Well, I quite like the UK model. I mean, it's why I like being here. Having said that, I mean, you can learn from every country. I lived in Canada, and I like the way in which they decentralize things through their confederal system in a way. I love the being in Ghana, for example, and how, you know, politics was a combination of the voluntary sector, the state, the local state, and the tribes, and that they had to share and collaborate and share power together. And I think that's a model we can learn from, how all of us, how we can share power together rather than to concentrate it on in one hand. And I mean, places like that I've learned a great deal from. France, I've always enjoyed. Russia, I've been to, and I love Russian history. I love Russian literature. And if we could put the soul that Russia has into our politics without the corruption, it would be absolutely fantastic.
All right, well, perhaps we'll just end on a few more fun questions. Recently, we've tried to introduce a few book reviews onto Enfield Voices. I wonder if there is one book you could recommend to the viewers this evening that you've read throughout your career. What would you recommend?
Well, if I were to be asked what's the book I would take with me on a desert island, and be allowed in one book only, it would be Tolstoy's War and Peace. I mean, it's so long I could read it over and over again, but it's got everything. That would be the book I would choose.
Oh, I like this one as well, actually. And if someone could play you in a film, who would it be?
Oh, that's a good question.
Who, if someone could play me in a film?
Yes, when we're dramatising your life and the success of Enfield Voices, Francis, who would you have play you in the main role?
Well, when I was younger, people said I looked a bit like David Hemmings. If you remember him, he was in several films. A couple of people said I looked like Tommy Still at one point, and I hope I didn't. Who would I have played? I don't know. I really, that's one question I can't answer. I can tell you who people also said I looked like Andre Previn at one point. I remember getting on a bus in Rotherham and the bus conductor refusing to take my money because he thought I was Andre Previn, and he was so proud to have Andre Previn on his bus. So I don't know. Maybe I'd bring Eric Morecambe back to life and let him pretend I'm Andre Previn, and then he could play everything, but not necessarily in the right order.
We are having requests for you to make use of the piano behind you, but I'm not. Might leave that for the next one. Maybe you could play us out.
No, I won't play you out. I don't refuse anything, but I'm refusing that.
Have you got a theme tune? Is there a particular piece of music that you like play when you're, that you think sort of sums you up?
No, there's no music that sums me up. I like jazz, I like classical music, and I like a wide variety of things in that. I think my favorite classical composer is Mozart, because he gives you calm, challenge, and complication all at the same time.
Well, I suppose our final question for this evening should really be, how's it been? How has it felt being on the other side of the interview?
Okay, I mean, I've been interviewed before. I chair a lot of meetings, I do a lot of interviewing, but before I did GlobalNet, I used to make speeches and so on. So it's quite normal and it's quite fun, and it's more relaxing actually. I think being a chair of a meeting is more stressful than actually being a speaker or being interviewed. And so I've enjoyed it. For me, it's been a half hour of total relaxation.
Well, thank you very much for joining us, Francis. It's been lovely speaking to you and to learn a bit more about you. And I think for all the people, especially the newer members of Enfield Voices, it's been really great getting to know you this evening.
Okay, well, thank you for doing the interview. I've enjoyed it, and I think you both have done fantastically well.